we are not in favor of employment equity. We're in favor of equity. Everybody should get the same opportunity based on skills, experience, and all that. But the true solution to this, in our view, is we need to up our education system. We've got the worst education system in the world. So we need to improve the education of our people. That will open up the job market, and we need to improve our economic growth. If we do that, we'll get job opportunities, more skilled employees, and more opportunities for everybody. We do not believe that opportunities and promotion and whatever needs to be based on race or gender, for that matter. We believe in economic growth for everybody.
We'll get into this conversation now with the Constitutional Court today dismissing NEASA and Sakeliga's application for leave to appeal directly to the Constitutional Court. And this comes from an earlier judgment by the High Court, which dismissed these two organizations' urgent application to interdict the implementation of employment equity targets announced by the Minister of Labour. And they wanted to have some input into these employment equity targets. We speak now to Jaco Swart, who's the NEASA National Manager. Jaco, thanks so much for joining us on Power Business. Where to from here now that the Constitutional Court has put a line in the sand?
Thank you very much and good evening. Look, this has always been a two-part application. So what we're dealing with currently in terms of Constitutional Court was Part A, that was the interdict. And as you mentioned, last year, August, September, the High Court dismissed our application for an urgent interdict to suspend the operation of the employment equity regulations and the targets that the Minister had set before 1 September when employers had to submit their reports. So we appealed directly to the Constitutional Court for direct access, which is an irregular step because normally you have to go through all the levels of the courts, the SCA, Supreme Court of Appeal, before you can get to the Concourt. But because there were constitutional issues raised in the judgment by the High Court, we thought it prudent to request the Constitutional Court for direct access. But it's not notoriously difficult to get direct access to the Constitutional Court, so we're not entirely surprised by the ruling. At the same time, we also petitioned the Supreme Court of Appeal for leave to appeal the very same judgment by the High Court. And that is currently being considered by the SCA, so we're waiting for a ruling on that. But that relates to Part A, only the interdict. The second part of the application, which is the review of the Minister's decision to gazette these regulations and these targets, is still ongoing. We were in court yesterday on an unopposed basis for a motion to compel the State Attorney to provide us with the record of their decision, which they have failed to do to date. And they were supposed to supply it to us within 10 days after we actually filed our review. So they failed to do it, so we got a court order yesterday. They have to supply the record now within 10 days, and thereafter we can decide to then supplement our papers further, and then they can oppose it. So that will run its course in due course, but it's going to take a time. It's not a normal or not an urgent matter. So it would be a normal course of things. That's probably going to take a year or two to finalize that matter.
What is the primary objection to the new EE targets?
The problem with the targets is, there are many issues. First of all, there were no consultation in respect of them. The Minister claimed that they've been consulting since 2019, but the targets that they published eventually and the targets that they claimed they consulted are entirely different. It's not the same set of targets. And the consultations that were supposedly held virtually was held with 18 sectors within a week, and one consultations was simply an information session. We attended all of them. Secondly, the targets are simply unobtainable. If you look at the current status of sectors and the targets that have been set, it's simply impossible taking into account the skills available, the attrition rate in companies, the economic growth. It can simply not be attained. There's no way. It's simply impossible. So it's irrational. They were supposed to do a socio-economic impact study on what the effect will be. That was not done. So there are various grounds, missteps that has been done, and we're even challenging the constitutional power of the minister to actually impose these types of targets. The Constitution does provide for affirmative action measures, but it does not permit quotas. And this is simply quotas to say that you are supposed to have in an organization that, for example, over 100 employees, 70 of them must be black men, 30% or 20 must be black women, 5 African women, 2, colored women. That's quotas, and it's simply impossible to achieve. It doesn't work that way. The arithmetic doesn't work.
Okay, so what research are you basing this on?
Well, basing what on?
That the targets are not workable.
Well, you can simply look at what the current situation is. If you look at what has been reported by designated employers as late as 2024, and compare that to what the targets are, you can see the massive differences. It seemed that the modus operandi of the department was simply to take the current position of the sectors, the different economic sectors in terms of employment equity, and simply to add a percentage onto that, anything between 7 to 9% on a year-on-year basis. So it didn't take into account any of the economic factors, the sector factors, the factors applicable to specific employers, their attrition rates, all that, the skills available. Didn't take any of that into account. And if you take that into account, as well as where people are situated. For example, KZN, it's got many more Indian people than Gauteng. So it might be easier to achieve your target for Indian people in KZN, but you're not going to be able to do it in Gauteng unless those people move.
What would a workable solution around employment equity look like for NEASA?
Well, employment, we are not in favor of employment equity. We're in favor of equity. Everybody should get the same opportunity based on skills, experience, and all that. But the true solution to this, in our view, is we need to up our education system. We've got the worst education system in the world, so we need to improve the education of our people. That will open up the job market, and we need to improve our economic growth. If we do that, we'll get job opportunities, more skilled employees, and more opportunities for everybody. We do not believe that opportunities and promotion and whatever needs to be based on race or gender, for that matter. We believe in economic growth for everybody.
For a very long time they were in South Africa. It was only around 32 years ago that changed. There was racial employment in place, and there was strictly gender employment in place. And so how does one reverse what took place?
Well, you're not going to reverse it by doing exactly the same thing again. It's the same thing. And you cannot re-engineer a society if you don't have the skills available, if you don't upskill people, and that's the problem. No employer's got a problem. Well, I say no employer. Most employers won't have a problem with employing a person of any race or any gender if they're the best person for the job.
Yes,
and that should be the criteria: the best person for the job, irrespective of their skin color, irrespective of their gender. That should be the criteria. And for that, we need hundreds and thousands of skilled employees. That's what we need.
But I mean, if a black candidate and a white candidate of similar skills levels, similar merit, then how should people then decide who the job goes to? I mean, it would be good to be in a position where everyone could be employed, where we are moving towards 10% unemployment rate, but in recognition of the fact that people had certain advantages based on years of racial employment quotas and targets, how do we change that picture?
Well, if they've got exactly the same skill, then obviously you need to look at personality and all that, and which person will fit in the best with your business. For example, if you take a business that's Muslim orientated, religiously, and they're probably going to appoint Muslims because it fits in with their culture.
Yeah, but then they'll only be able to sell to Muslims. They won't ever be able to diversify their customer base. It's quite important for companies to have a diverse team.
Well, it is important. It might be, but that should be their choice. I mean, if they want to limit themselves by doing that, that should be their choice. Same with a company that's black owned. It's got a Zulu culture, for example. Now, these quotas or these targets tell them that they must employ a certain number of Indian or colored people, which don't fit their culture.
Okay. Well, I mean, it would be very difficult for a company that wants to grow and wants to expand beyond being a very tiny business if they just keep it to a particular race or particular religion.
Yeah. Look, everybody, I agree with you, but that should be their choice. And that's all we're saying. It should be the choice of the employer. If they want to do that and limit their opportunities, well, that's their baby to deal with.
The issue is
I'm not saying it's not short-sighted. Everybody got certain set of skills.
Sure.
If you are silly enough to exclude a person from your workplace who's got excellent skills simply because of race or gender, that's going to be to your own detriment.
Yeah. The issue is, though, Jaco, is that for the last 200 years or so, there was job reservation for white people. Yes. And so many people were able to use that capital to start businesses. And then they want to employ people who look like them, who sound like them. And it's difficult for people who sound different or look different to get opportunities. So the question is, how do we reverse that?
Yeah. Look, like I said, everybody has to have the same opportunity, but this is not about opportunity. This is not about equal opportunity. It's about equal outcome. And that's the difference. We agree, everybody of every race, every gender must have the same opportunities.
Right.
But you
do recognize that there is inherent bias in hiring situations, and people will generally want to hire people that they recognize and know. And just because of our country's history, that generally means that people who are white, that's changing, but for a very long time, people who are white benefited from the majority of opportunities.
Agreed. I agree with you completely, but that has changed.
Okay.
That has changed, but you're not going to change this with this type of legislation. If you don't create jobs, you can have targets to employ 1 million people of female or colored Indian or black race. If you don't create jobs, it's not going to matter, and we are losing jobs.
There, I agree with you. Except, though, that the Department of Labour is not responsible for growing the economy. I mean, they do have a very important position there, but they are not responsible for setting fiscal policy, for example.
No, they are not, but they're part of the government, it is.
Sure. But maybe this case would be better directed towards the Minister of Finance for failing to grow the economy.
Well, it's not really the Minister of Finance, is it? It's really government policy and trust in government. That's the problem, due to corruption, the infrastructure that's failing. We know all those issues. The state departments are not working, municipalities are not working. People don't want to invest. They said that a pile of cash in the private sector, I'm speaking under correction, it must be in excess of 2 trillion rand now that they're sitting on. They don't want to invest because there's no confidence in government, in their ability to govern and to actually take the country forward.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Well, I think we can agree that we have many challenges in South Africa. Thanks so much for talking to us, Jaco Swart. We'll leave it there. NEASA National Manager, about the Constitutional Court dismissing NEASA and Sakeliga's application for leave to appeal directly to the Constitutional Court about the employment equity case, the targets. They wanted them interdict, but they will continue to fight on the substantive matter of the case.